here's this learning and development team, stakeholders have access to you. They don't know that that training comes in like different shapes. Like
Yeah.
they don't know what
Yeah.
exists. So they're like, hey, we want an e-learning.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to like course correct and guide them towards the correct like training solution.
Welcome to Making Better, a podcast from Better Everyday Studios devoted to helping small learning teams have a big impact. Today, we're talking to Sarah Carroll, a seasoned L&D professional who brings over a decade of experience cultivated in 3 countries. Throughout her career, Sarah has continuously found herself in the building out stages of both organizations and teams. This means she has gained valuable insights into how to optimize and scale procedures in order to best deliver impactful learning experiences. Today, she will be sharing how some of these procedures can empower your learning team to proactively avoid lackluster courses while still effectively meeting business objectives. As a reminder, if you want to get these episodes early and go deeper on the topics covered, you can sign up for the Making Better newsletter in the episode description below. Let's dive in. Sarah, welcome to the Making Better podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey Matt, happy Friday. How's it going?
I am doing great. I'm so excited to get into this discussion today. So we had a brief exchange on LinkedIn a while back, where I had made a comment, and then I had made a post, and you had commented something on that post about making specific pipelines for content. And as soon as I read what you had said, I knew I was like, this is a thing that we got to dive into. But before we get there, if you could just give a quick rundown of introduce yourself to the people listening.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Sarah. I am an L&D leader and strategist. I have been in and around L&D and education for over 10 years now, working in a variety of countries, actually. I've had the opportunity to work in the US, in Spain, in a small country called Andorra, which a lot of people don't know about, but right there between Spain and France. And then I also had the opportunity to live in London. So I've got a lot of global experience under my belt. And yeah, I landed in L&D organically, like a lot of my peers. Never, didn't go to school dreaming to be an L&D professional. Actually
Who
studied
does?
journalism.
Not
I
many
know,
people do.
I know. It's funny, but you just land in these like training roles,
Yeah.
which, eventually led me to project management, which led me to program management, which led me to people management.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just kind of stumbling through my career, one opportunity at a time, but loving every minute of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I will admit I didn't know where Andorra was, so I recognize some of the other places, but I will admit that. Yeah, and you have had quite the varied career. More recently, you've been in the tech world,
Yes.
and yeah, and I know from my experience, the tech world can be kind of an interesting place for
Yeah.
learning. What was your experience like, specifically, doing L&D at a software company?
Yeah. I will say I also landed there very by chance. I actually was reached out to on LinkedIn by the hiring manager and was like, hey, we have this role. And it was honestly one of the best decisions I ever made was to explore the tech space in L&D. Learning and development in tech right now is so exciting. I think we're seeing a really big shift and an emphasis on learning.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, and from my viewpoint and from colleagues and peers that I've discussed with, so you're seeing a lot right now of companies starting to weave learning into their culture, right? With
Yeah.
learning stipends, professional development stipends, um, accesses to like LinkedIn Learning and other various platforms. And in addition to that, they're starting to invest in their learning teams. Current economic climate aside,
Sure.
um, some are investing in it, some are scaling back. But I fully believe when things start to improve, they'll start to ramp it up again. Um, so yeah, it's just a really really cool space to be in. One of the biggest reasons is I had previously come from the public sector,
Okay.
so I was at UC Berkeley. And when you move from that to tech, it's like, whoa, things move crazy fast here.
Yeah. 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 When I moved from the military into the private sector, it was the same thing of just like, oh, this is okay. We're moving now. We're doing
Yeah,
things.
you're moving, you're doing things, and then also the opportunity to contribute and have ideas and share ideas. And like when you do that and you see something change from day to day versus like over the course of a year,
Yeah.
of it going through, all of the hoops it has to go through to get
Yeah. All
approved in the
the
public
all the
sector.
committees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's exciting in that aspect. It's also challenging because it moves so quickly.
Yes.
Um, so I'm sure you've experienced that you're constantly building the plane while flying it. I hate that expression. It is used so frequently in tech
Yes.
with every initiative. Like, all right, guys, like, you're constantly scrambling. So that can be challenging, but again, also exciting because you're never bored.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then the other thing too is with this new emphasis on learning comes an organization of people who are excited to utilize their learning and development teams, which is great and like so excited. We're there to support, but also then, whoa, we're being inundated by like requests and everybody wants a training for every little thing. And then it's like, okay. We need to like get this organized and sorted out. So I hope that made sense. It's a lot of everything, a lot of fast moving things, a lot of moving parts, a lot of, jack of all trades
Yeah.
requirements for L&D professionals right now. But if you like that type of environment, I think that, people would excel because it's, for me, it was exciting and a great change of pace.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be, yeah, it's really exciting and really fun, but it's like you have to almost like know what you're getting into, kind of
Yes.
if you're really going to succeed, because it's not for everybody, not better or worse. It's just not for everybody.
Yeah.
And I do think you're right. And we were actually talking before we started recording a little bit where there's almost two sides of the coin of either nobody knows what L&D does and it's off to the side and you're like having to fight for anybody to notice you, and then you get what you want, you get noticed, and then all of a sudden everybody realizes, ooh, this is this resource, and you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum of just like, oh geez, now there's so many requests, we can't keep up. I know I feel like a couple times in my career that has happened, and I almost didn't realize what was happening, and it
Yeah.
took me a minute to like be like, oh, like we need to stop asking people to do stuff for them because we can't do it. It was pretty crazy.
Yeah. I know. It's funny because in the beginning, L&D, I feel like fought so hard to be like, hey, like you said, we're here. Hey guys,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
here to help. And then eventually it comes to the point where you have to start turning people away of like,
Yeah.
hey, we're swamped. We can't tackle that. You guys can tackle that initiative internally and we'll help you with this one. So it's funny how there's been that shift, but at least in my experience, we were getting requests daily, if not multiple
Yeah.
times a day.
Yeah.
It was wild, but again, fun. If
Yeah.
if you're looking for something that is exciting, join a tech company.
Yeah, for sure. And so before we get into this kind of the specifics of how you solved that problem and brought some
Yeah,
organization to it, where give us a little sense of the situation you were in, like the team that you had, who was your customer, like where were
yeah.
you situated, what kind of stuff were you making?
Yeah. So I was on a domain specific L&D team,
Okay.
which means we supported a very specific group of employees within the company. So I was supporting our client onboarding analysts and team, which sat under customer operations. So they were client facing and they were doing the internal process to, approve or deny clients from our platform.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so we were training them. We did everything. So they would join the company and they would go through their 2-day orientation with like the people team, the L&D team for Coinbase as a whole, and then they'd come over to us and then we would run their role specific onboarding program and get them ramped and ready to do their jobs. Um, so we owned and managed their onboarding program, but we also did like change management initiatives, tooling rollouts, upskilling, cross skilling, continued education, and we even helped with reorgs a few times. So anything learning for that group of employees, we were doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Sounds like almost you could almost upscale a little bit of like all things talent almost, for like that particular team in some ways.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's really what we owned. But in addition to kind of like, you know, supporting them in the spirit of building the plane while flying it, our team was growing like crazy. So when I started at Coinbase, the L&D team in that specific area was only a couple months old. Um, and I was on a team of me and one other senior specialist. He was actually promoted and moved over to support another line of business. So it was me. And then I grew from me to five of us to support
Nice.
just this one
Yeah.
group of employees because it was so like it was the most demanding line of business to support under customer
Yeah.
operations. So not only are we supporting, the employees, but then we're trying to figure out our own operations. How are we going to operate like a well-oiled machine and lay that foundation for our team? We were migrating to a new LMS. We were onboarding our own teammates. We were just doing everything to get established ourselves
Yeah.
while simultaneously, I think I onboarded over like 800 people in my
Yeah.
time there. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of that, going across the spectrum too can really be, where you are in the business and what part of the business you're supporting. And definitely when you're supporting those customer facing side of the business, whether it's customer success or sales, installation folks, if you're in a hardware kind of environment, that can be very tricky and because it's so demanding. It's
yeah,
so it's great because there's a lot of demand, but it's like, oh, well now we got to keep up because if we're not fulfilling our role, we are truly impacting the business. And as much as learning and
yeah,
development professionals say we want to impact the business, I think we all believe it, but it's different to want it and then be faced with that reality of like, we need to step up, which is awesome, and I
yeah,
think we all should be striving for that. But it's a different responsibility if you're used to being more of a back end player or a support player.
yes. Yeah. I think hit the nail on the head is like the level of responsibility on your L&D teams in those domain specific, what I call them L&D teams is so much greater. I mean, I
Yeah,
was in charge of leading an initiative that literally was like we had compliance regulators like breathing down our neck to fill something by a certain deadline, and we had to onboard, I think it was 390 people
wow,
in 6 weeks,
wow,
and build it from scratch.
yeah,
They're like,
yeah,
hey, L&D. And so it's like, again, having that ability to make the impact was amazing and
yeah,
exciting.
yeah,
But I think it's a totally different ballgame than the L&D teams who might just be creating like professional development material for people to, access as they want, as needed. It's definitely a different ballgame.
yeah, for sure. So I think we've been teasing the main subject of what I wanted to talk about enough, where
Yeah,
we talked about, okay, so there's this big need, this big demand. Everybody always, all of a sudden wants your help with everything. And then the
yeah,
comment that you made on LinkedIn was about, creating that process
mm-hmm.
to intake those requests, prioritize requests, scope everything. I got the opportunity to do this at a previous company, and I felt it was like the greatest impact that I had at that company. I was there for
Yes,
4 years, and building this thing was like, this is what I am proud of. So I'd love for you to kind of take us through, I guess, to start. Where did it start? Like how, I think you've already said, it was just like you're kind of being overwhelmed. So you had to do something. What were the first steps that you made towards building this process?
yeah. Also, I love to hear you say that that was like your greatest accomplishment because it was truly, I mean, I continued to beat a dead horse like until it got done on I should, sorry, let me clarify. I was on the one team for most of my time at Coinbase, and then I was actually promoted and reorged over to a new team who didn't have this set up.
Got it.
Um, and so that's where I had taken all of the innovation that was created on my previous team and started. I was like, guys, we got to get this going. We got to get this going. Um, which, let me add, is another insanely important reason to streamline and standardize your procedures across the organization
Sure.
for L&D if you are listening and you're at a company with a lot of micro L&D teams, the biggest recommendation I could make is to get those L&D leaders together and start streamlining those processes that are, the backbone of L&D that every L&D team is using: intake, scoping, report pulling, uploading to LMS, delivery, deployment, whatever. And make sure that they're the same across, because when you have those reorgs, and we know in today's climate that we do, that's going to make it so much better.
Yeah.
So that's my
It,
little tangent on that.
well, and even more than that, I would say no matter how distributed or broken apart your learning team, quote unquote, is, to the company, to the employees, you're all learning people.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're a technical trainer out in like production, or you're an instructional designer in HR, or you're a program manager inside of customer success, it's to the employee, you're all training people, and they're going to expect you to, even if you're not on the same team, they're going to kind of expect that you would act as if you were on the same team.
Yes. Yeah. I always say that, like, the benefit of getting things streamlined, it's not only for ourselves, right? Because it makes our lives a lot easier,
Yeah.
but our stakeholders then know how
Yeah.
to interact with us.
Yeah.
If they're interacting with multiple learning teams,
Yeah.
then the learners start to, have a cohesive experience, and
Yeah.
not really, I've talked about like a disjointed experience that learners can have when learning teams are doing things differently. But then, like, again, the bottom line for the company, which is money. Time is money in all
Yeah.
aspects.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, just so important. But I promise I will rein it back in and come back to this
Yeah.
intake process.
Awesome. Yeah.
But yeah, so the intake process, this is what was happening truly. Was I would be in a meeting and you'd get a request for a training.
Yeah.
I would be in a Slack channel and you'd get a request for a training. I worked with a lot of vendor sites, and you would get an email with a request for a training.
Yeah.
I one time discovered a request for a training just by having like an honest conversation with a colleague who sat on a different team. And he's like, yeah, this is what I'm working on. And I'm like, oh, shoot, you need a training for that. Like, that literally was what was happening. And I'm like, okay, no. We need to like start to funnel this, because it's just, it's creating so much more work and stress than needs to be. Um, there was already an intake that semi existed, but it just, getting buy-in and getting that behavioral change of our stakeholders to start using it, that was
Okay.
another step. So that's
Yeah.
something that, it takes work and consistency, and like, it takes, if you do build one of these like intake request systems or processes, make sure that it's accessible
Yeah.
and in the right places,
Yeah.
right? Like pinning it to your Slack channel, putting it on your team's Confluence page, wherever, people are visiting to find your team. Like, make sure it's like
Yeah.
in big bold, like, use this,
Yeah.
because like a tool is only as useful as people know about it and can
Yeah.
access it. So
Yeah. But I think I do
yeah.
think that's interesting, because I 100% agree with everything you said. But then I would add that you cannot make it visible enough that it's more visible than Slack or more visible than email. And so, to the first point that you mentioned, no matter what you do, there's going to be that like constant push of change management and behavior management of like, thank you for sending me this Slack. Please go over here.
Yes.
It's just
constant.
it's inevitable. It will realistically never go away. But I'd love to. I don't know if you've had this experience, but in my experience, I think I was much more afraid of pushing back than I needed to be. Early on, I thought if I pushed back, everybody would be like really mad, and they weren't. They're just like, "Oh, okay," and they would go put in an intake request.
Yeah. So I unfortunately don't have that problem.
Great.
No, I'm very nice, but like I would just, I'm like kind of like a stickler. I would have, my team coming to me and being like, hey, they sent me this request. And I would say, hey, just send them this message, let them know they need to submit the request. I think it's fine. I always talk everything up to like, it's business.
Yeah.
Like, they would do the same.
Yeah.
Um,
One quick note. So the intake system was kind of already there. What was it? Just if you can, was it like
yeah,
a
so
home baked thing, or was it Jira, or was
yeah, we were using Jira.
Okay.
I also have seen this work in Coda. Another team had built it out in Coda, and it also could work in Google Forms. So
Yep.
again, for any teams listening, like you can build this anywhere you want.
Yeah.
Just make sure that it's again visible and easy to use. Jira, if you are in a company that's already using Jira for IT and tooling and HR and all the things, it makes sense to put it there because the
Yes.
company's familiar with it. Like
Yes.
you don't need to add extra more learning to get the learning requests. Like, like just make it as easy for everyone to use as possible.
Can't footstop that point enough of how important
Yeah.
that is. Of this is not the time to go find a new learning tool
Yes.
to solve. It's like these things exist that
Yeah.
chances are, especially if you're in a customer facing company, there's already some system that exists for opening customer tickets, support tickets.
Yeah.
Find out how you can piggyback on something that already exists.
Yes. Do
100%.
not reinvent the wheel. It's like that. That's in learning and development in general, is like you don't always have to create new. Just like take something that's working and make it work for you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we were using Jira. There was one that was like, I mean, the intake form was, it just didn't have the information that we needed anymore. It was outdated. So it was revamped to be separated out into categories. And I think we had one like you could click on new hire onboarding, you could click on like change management, net new training, and maybe I think other, if I'm recalling correctly. But then like the stakeholder could click on one of those and then it would take you to the form for that, which
Okay.
was awesome because then you're getting the data of like which types of these requests are we getting the most of.
Yep.
But then you're going to need different information for different training. So like a new hire request is going to be different than a net new training. And then it allowed us to customize those fields
Yep.
to get the
Great.
information that we needed. And that is where the net new is where that next step of that scoping process, which is what the comment was.
Yeah.
I think my comment was like the meeting that should have been an email, but like the training that should have been a Slack message.
Yep.
That's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
um, and so that's where the scoping process came, was everybody wants a training. Everybody wants an e-learning. And I don't know about you, Matt, but like I hate e-learnings. I hate taking them.
Yeah. I make e-learning for a living, and I still say don't make e-learning.
Yeah, I'm like, there's a time and a place.
Yes.
And if what you want to do is burn out your employees and make them hate learning and hate the learning and development team, continue to just bust out e-learnings that
Yeah.
employees have to take every week.
Yeah.
I think that it's just, again, here's this learning and development team, stakeholders have access to you. They don't know that that training comes in like different shapes. Like
Yeah.
they don't know what
No.
exists. So they're like, hey, we want an e-learning.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility to like course correct and guide them towards the correct like training solution. So
That's it right there.
yeah.
I'm always looking for what's going to be the line that's like the intro to a podcast, and that's the line right there, right? Like that's the takeaway. It's like they don't know, they're not in this space. It's our job to help them with this, figuring out what the right solution is. 100%.
Yes. It's so true. And I think to do that, make it easy on your L&D team and have a process that already exists.
Yeah.
Um, they grab it. They can use this template that exists of, okay, what information do I need to gather before I can make that decision? And that's what the scoping process was that we created. Was so if you've ever used Jira, you know, like, okay, you kind of get tired. You're not going to input every last
Yeah.
detail about what you need. You
Yeah.
want it quick and you want to get in and get out because you got a lot of other stuff going on.
Which is why people are going to go to Slack. Like if you make too much friction, they're just going to say,
Yes,
forget about it. I'm going to send a Slack message. So super important point
exactly.
of is what's the right level of input because you can't make it too much.
Exactly. And so for something like a net new where they're like, we want an e-learning, sorry, I said that a little bit snarky. Feel free to cut that or leave it in. We want an e-learning excitedly. Um, we, you want like a summary, you want a brief description, perhaps a date of like when they're looking for this. You can add in more if you want. If they're check boxes, add in check boxes. That's fine. People don't mind those or drop downs. Okay, like who's it? Is it for BPOs? Is it for full time employees? Is it for client onboarding professionals, or is it for people supporting another line of business?
Yeah, I think one that I've used in the past to try to help with this is kind of like try to had a drop down of like size of audience,
Yes.
which maybe they don't know, but that was one that I
So
liked. It was like, is this your pet project for like the 3 people on your team, or is this like 300 or
yeah, yeah, and that brings me to another point, which is like the roster, which
Mm.
I don't know about your experience, is the hardest thing to get. I mean, getting a learning roster is like asking someone for $1 million. They're just like, they somehow cannot produce it until it's absolutely time. They can give you a general idea, but we had a box in Jira that was like, put the link to the roster. Never got filled.
No,
So take
no.
it out, put it on this scoping process, and we'll ask them in a meeting, like so we can be on the same page. But yeah, that learning roster is like gold and
The number of times
unattainable.
I have had somebody just tell me all engineers need to take this, and
Oh,
like I don't think you know what that term means.
they're just like, that's fantastic. Could I just find a list of their names, emails, something for me, like just anything to help me through this. But yeah, we weren't getting that, so kept that like intake form fairly short so we could get you know a basis, like a basic understanding. And then in the scoping, that's where you can get more detailed because you'll set a meeting, right? You'll set
Yeah.
this 30-minute meeting with the stakeholders who leading this initiative, where you can go deeper into like, okay, tell me the challenge. What are we trying to solve here? What are the KPIs you're looking at? What is the results you're trying to get? What's your timeline? What's who needs to take this? Who really needs to take this? Who needs to take this when? Because again, I don't know about you, but like we've had trainings where they're like, okay, well actually we just need 10 people trained this week and then we can roll it out slowly to more.
Mm-hmm.
So you're able to get those kind of like more important details face to face.
Yep.
Um, and I think it's so much more efficient. You're also, I kind of want to put an asterisk next to like timeline and come back to that because that's another thing. But once you get all the information you need, like who the SMEs are that you're going to be working with and like links to existing documentation that they might have, then that's when your team can go and review that. You set another follow up meeting, shorten it if you want, if people are busy. And that's when you can say, hey, after taking this into consideration, after assessing the risks, after looking at your timeline, after looking at, XYZ, we think we don't need an e learning course. We actually need a quick 1 hour live session or a Slack message or a one pager that they can reference back to. And that's when you can make your proposal of like the appropriate learning solution. Um, but I will say, timeline, going all the way back to how exciting it is to work in tech, people will ask you for a training for next week
Yes.
with zero understanding that it actually takes time to build them. So, within reason, again, I have no problem like just communicating clearly like expectations, and so I have pushed back on timeline a time or two on like, hey, that's really unrealistic for my team. I did so much one time as to like collect the actual data of how long it took my team to build something, and then did a whole presentation for my stakeholders, which was fantastic because it
Yeah.
really helped them. They were like, "Whoa, uh, So if you need to get buy-in, that's a way to do it.
I like that.
But
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard that before. I think especially if you have a clear set of stakeholders, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, so we did. Again, we were very domain specific. I was engaging, a time or two you're engaging with cross-functional folks from other teams, but mostly I was supporting the same team of, I think there were like 5 or 6 managers that we were working with. But we and hundreds and hundreds of employees. But yeah, that so timeline, don't be afraid to be realistic, because here's the bottom line is you want learners to have a good experience with learning
Yeah.
at the company. You don't want them looking at it as like a punishment or here's another crappy e-learning. You want them to have quality so that way they're excited to do it, and you want them to like feel like it's helping them do their job.
Yeah.
So if you're going to push out something next week that's not very great, but if you get a couple extra days, it can reduce the risk of retraining.
Yeah.
Advocate for that.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
with the understanding that they may just flat out say no, like we need
Yeah.
it by here. But at least you tried.
Yeah. So I really love this because so it's like you're starting off with a tool that people ideally already use, so you have this
Yeah.
system for intake, so they put it in. You make that initial interaction relatively low friction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just to get it in there gives you a chance to look at it. You set up an initial meeting to kind of go through stuff. Then they send you all their stuff that you read through. Then you set up a follow-up meeting. And so by the time you are giving them your proposal, where you maybe agree, maybe disagree, you're kind of like 3 or 4 touch points into the relationship. And those early relationship points were like pretty low stress, like tried to be pretty friendly and frictionless. So there's kind of, there's a base there where when you're not, the point I'm getting at is it's not like they send you an email and you're like, this doesn't need to be training. You're like, you're kind of having a conversation first. And you're like,
Yes.
after careful review, which I think is great. I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
You want to have like, they're people you're working with relatively regularly, probably, and you want to have a good relationship with them. None of
Yeah.
this is to say I realize I'm like, oh, maybe I'm coming off like, no, this is how it has to be. Definitely not. It's a
Yeah.
conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's a two-way street and it's a relationship. And we had very good relationships with our stakeholders. And you want to make an informed strategic decision that's best for the business,
Yeah.
not that's necessarily best for L&D.
Yeah.
It's not about being the best for L&D, but it's about efficiency and effectiveness,
Yeah.
and using like our expertise to make the best proposal and coming to a compromise if needed. Because sometimes people are like, we really need the e-learning because we have to check. They have to
Have to
check
check
it
the
off,
box.
right? We
Yeah.
need that in the LMS.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's understandable. So
Yeah.
it's definitely not meant to be like a dictatorship. What LMD says goes. It has to be a partnership, um, to have the best results. Again,
Yeah.
because you're going to continue working with everyone, and eventually you'll get into a groove,
Yeah.
and they may start to learn. Oh, this might not be an e-learning. Hey, can we get a
Yeah.
live training? Or hey, what
Yeah.
what do you think is you know a good idea for this solution? So, um, yeah, definitely make it a friendly encounter
Yeah, absolutely.
with your
And so
colleagues.
I know we're running out of time, but the one last question I want to make sure to ask is when you're delivering that, how often how often were you giving a different solution than they originally thought they needed? How often were you just saying like, no, we can't help you? And then how much in both of those situations, like how much pushback was there and how did you deal with that?
That's a big question.
Yes, I know.
I'm like, so I would say how often, I'm gonna chunk that out for
Great.
my brain. How often did we give an alternative solution? I can think of, um, I
Super
can think
rough.
of a handful of times,
Oh, okay.
maybe.
Okay.
And often it was met with uh, approval, like excitement, like cool, that
Great.
sounds great.
Great.
Because we would come up with a way for example, the LMS thing where they like, we needed in the LMS for to have this checked off, we would come up with a way of like, okay, this doesn't need to be a training. It might be I can think of a time I built a one pager, which is
Sure.
like, a PDF with a
Yep.
chart on it that people
Yep.
could literally just look at as they're doing their job.
Yep.
Uploaded that to the LMS, told them to download it, and they hit complete.
Yep.
So yeah, we would always come up with ways to make sure we were meeting their needs. So it wasn't met with too much resistance. I think the more thing that was met with resistance versus like the type of training was more the timeline,
Okay.
which they, again, when I would start to collect data, you have to speak the language of the business, and people like numbers and people respect numbers. So you
Yeah.
collect that data. And that started to help with the timeline thing of like, either they weren't giving us enough time and we could get a little more, or, you're looking at examples of when you were asked to roll out a training prematurely, and then we had to literally retrain people again, like 2-3 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're showing them that like, hey, if we can reduce this risk, if we add a little bit more time on in the beginning, it's going to, save us time in the long run.
Yeah.
But making sure to come again respectfully and presenting them with numbers that makes more sense than just like, well, I think this is going to be the better way.
Yeah.
You have to do a little bit more work.
Yeah, and which is one of the more great reasons why you want to have why a ticketing system or some kind of structure can help, because now you have that ticket, and that ticket can live on, and you can put information in it, and you can say, this is how long. Yeah, this is how long it took. This is when it was published. This is whatever you want to do. It's super helpful. And so speaking the language of the business, if you are at basically any company that has a significant number of software engineers, I can almost guarantee you they have Jira, Asana, like something, Monday.com, whatever it is, something like that. And it is really easy to repurpose that. And now like you are going to be seen as a part of the business because you're using the business's tools.
Which is like the end goal is, on another podcast I was on, it was like, I literally kept saying the same thing over and over, which was like L&D is working to get that seat at the table to like be viewed as a strategic business partner. Right. So we can be there proactively and eventually avoid timeline issues or like whatever, because we would be there from day one being like, hey, you need this learning solution. Hey, how about this? Proactively instead of reactively, but little by little, we'll get there.
Yeah. It's a long journey for sure. For sure. Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time, Sarah, so thank you so much. And any last words that you want, anything else really important that you want to make sure to bring up?
No, I would say, again, if you're listening and you don't have an intake, start there. Start to think about training life cycle as a whole. Start to think about your intake, then scoping, start to think about what processes your team might need to review their courses and content they create. Think about how they're uploading to the LMS. Think about deployment. I know I'm saying a lot of things, but the whole bottom line is start to think about that backbone of logistics and just slowly, one by one, tackle them. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither will this, especially as you're supporting employees while you do this. But eventually, that will help your team run more effectively, efficiently, and free up time for what we love, which is creating, innovative learning solutions. So
exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think people will definitely find some value in this, especially, at smaller teams or teams that are just getting started. So thanks again for being on, and I look forward to talking to you more in the future.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Matt. This was fun.